We are now just 1 month away from the 2024 presidential election, where history will be made between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. After both the presidential and vice presidential debate, as well as many other major events, we can now get a good sense of who is favored to win this election. Today, I will be updating my 2024 electoral map prediction based on the newest polling averages in all 50 states 1 month before the election. Before we get started, please subscribe to my channel for more election content and more election predictions, as well as real-time updates on major events related to the 2024 election. Today, we will start by taking a look at who is favored to win the election. Taking a look at 538 presidential election simulations, we see that Kamala Harris wins 54 times out of 100 compared to Donald Trump's 45. From this, we can see that Kamala Harris is slightly favored to win, but this election is a virtual toss-up, and we really have to take a deeper look into these states to see how this election will play out. Before we take a look into the states, let's take a look at the national polls. Taking a look at the national polls, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 2.5%. However, this election is not decided by the popular vote, but by the Electoral College, so we really have to take a deeper dive into these key battleground states, such as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. We will start by characterizing the solid states for each candidate. These are states that each candidate are expected to win by 15% or more in the election. For Kamala Harris, those states would be Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, Illinois, New York, Maine's 1st District, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, and the District of Columbia. For Donald Trump, his solid states would include Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Indiana. He will also solidly win the District of Nebraska. With the solid states, Kamala Harris stands at 181 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 122 electoral votes. We will now be moving on to the likely states for each candidate. These are states that candidates are expected to win by 10 to 15% in margin in the 2024 election. For Kamala Harris, she will likely win the states of Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia, New Hampshire, Maine's 1st District, and the state of Minnesota. In all of these states, Kamala Harris leads by a solid margin, with Minnesota being Tim Walz's home state, in which he's been serving as governor in since 2019. For Donald Trump, he will likely win the states of Alaska, Iowa, and Ohio. With the solid states, Kamala Harris stands at 225 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 148 electoral votes. We will now be moving on to the lean states for each candidate. These are states that candidates are expected to win by 3 to 5% in margin, making them somewhat competitive. Starting with the state of Nevada. Taking a look at the polls in Nevada, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 1%. Now, the reason I'm putting Nevada in the lean category is because, as you can see, Kamala Harris has been surging in this state. Taking a look at the newest Atlas Intel polls, which was the most accurate predictor for the 2020 election, we see that they have Kamala Harris up by 3. In the past, Nevada has voted pretty consistently, going to the Democrats by 2.4% in both 2016 and in 2020. And with Harris now leading in the polls, with her lead also growing, she is on track to win Nevada and its 6 electoral votes. Moving on to the state of Michigan. Taking a look at the polling averages in Michigan, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 1.9%. Now, compared to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, Michigan is rather on the liberal side, going to Biden by 2.8% in 2020. Now, demographically, Kamala Harris is performing pretty good in Michigan, with the majority of its voters being white, where Harris is actually showing strength compared to Biden in 2020. As of recently, some of the newest polls have even shown Kamala Harris up by 6 in Michigan, which is a huge margin in the swing state. Many other factors contribute, but as of now, I will be giving Michigan to Kamala Harris by a lean margin. Moving on to the lean states for Donald Trump, Trump will win the states of Texas and Florida. In both 2016 and in 2020, Trump won the states of Texas and Florida by a comfortable margin, even expanding his lead in Florida in 2020 to 3.4%. Texas, on the other hand, has been shifting to the left. With the growing population, Texas has gotten more and more liberal every single election. However, it is not yet at a point where Democrats can realistically win the state and its 40 electoral votes. With the lean states, Kamala Harris stands at 247 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 218 electoral votes as we move on to the final states that will ultimately decide the 2024 election. Let's take a look at the state of Arizona. As of recently, the former Republican senator in Arizona, Jeff Flake, has endorsed Kamala Harris for president. Now, this is huge for the Kamala Harris campaign and detrimental for the Donald Trump campaign, as it is not only Jeff Flake who has endorsed Kamala, but 200 other Republicans, including former Vice President Dick Cheney. In Arizona, there is also an abortion referendum going on, which will give Democrats a boost. With all of these factors, I will be giving Arizona to Kamala Harris by a very slight margin. Moving on to the state of Georgia. Taking a look at the polls in Georgia, we see that Donald Trump leads by 1.2%. In 2020, Biden had a historic flip in the state of Georgia, winning it by 0.2%. 4 years later, Harris is not as popular as Biden was 4 years ago, but Trump, on the other hand, is also not as popular as he was 4 years ago. During the vice presidential debate, Tim Walz asked J.D. Vance straight to the face, did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election? And Vance was unable to provide a yes or no answer, with Walz responding, that's a damning non-answer. However, the shift in Georgia does give Donald Trump a slight lead as of now, so I will be giving Georgia to Donald Trump by a very slight margin. Moving on to the state of North Carolina. As of recently, in North Carolina, the Republican nominee for governor, Mark Robinson, has been plagued with many major scandals regarding some extreme comments he made on various websites across the internet. Ever since these scandals, Mark Robinson's campaign has plummeted and he is virtually guaranteed to lose in North Carolina. Now, the important thing to realize about these scandals are that Mark Robinson's actions not only tie to himself and his own campaign, but also that of Donald Trump. This is because Donald Trump has always been very close to Mark Robinson, praising him in many ways, stating that he was Martin Luther King Jr. on steroids, and even calling him a better version of Martin Luther King. Now, as of recently, the association between Mark Robinson and Donald Trump has become clear, and voters in North Carolina are tempted to vote against Trump, as they are with Mark Robinson. Now, this is another detrimental scandal in North Carolina for Donald Trump, and due to many other factors, I will be giving North Carolina to Kamala Harris by a very slight margin. And with North Carolina, Kamala Harris has passed the 270 electoral count majority required to become the next president of the United States of America. Moving on to our final three states. The state of Wisconsin will go to Kamala Harris by the slightest of margins. Taking a look at the polling averages in Wisconsin, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 1.6%. This is a decent lead in the polls, with the newest poll showing her up by 3. Demographically, Harris is performing well amongst white voters, which also primarily make up the Rust Belt. In 2020, Biden was more popular than Harris is now, but demographically, Harris is actually performing better than Biden amongst white voters 4 years ago. And keeping in mind that the Rust Belt is primarily made up of white voters, Harris does hold the slight advantage here. Because of that, I will be giving Wisconsin to Kamala Harris by a very slight margin. Moving on to the Keystone State of Pennsylvania, the most important state in the 2024 election. Taking a look at the polling averages in Pennsylvania, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 0.6%. Pennsylvania is one of the most important states in the 2024 election, and as of now, it is a virtual toss-up between Harris and Trump. However, in Pennsylvania, there are many factors that can contribute to each candidate's likelihood of winning. In the recent vice presidential debate, Tim Walz asked JD Vance straight to the face if Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, and Vance was not able to provide a yes or no answer. This was one of the biggest moments in the debate, making many news headlines after. Now, in 2020, Biden won the state of Pennsylvania by 1.2%, and I don't think the shift towards Donald Trump is big enough to give Donald Trump Pennsylvania, and as of now, Harris also does hold a slight lead in the polls, so because of that, I will be giving Pennsylvania to Kamala Harris by a very, very slight margin. And finally, the state of Maine will go to Donald Trump, making the final electoral count 303 electoral votes for Kamala Harris to 235 electoral votes for Donald Trump. If you made it here, please subscribe to my channel for more election content and more election predictions leading up to the 2024 election. Thank you for watching.